My son's message came at 9:17 p.m. "We don't want you at the wedding." I read it 3 times sitting alone on my front porch, the same porch where I used to wait for him to come home from school. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. It just dropped. Because I had paid for the catering. I had helped plan the entire reception, and somehow I had still become the one person they didn't want there. But the truth is, that message didn't come out of nowhere. It started long before that night. If you've ever loved someone who slowly pushed you out of their life, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. I read every single one. My name is Lucille Bennett, though most people who know me well call me Lucy. I'm 63 years old, a widow for nearly 12 years, and I've lived in the same quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio for more than 3 decades. It's the kind of place where the mailman knows your dog's name, where neighbors wave even if they don't quite remember yours, and where memories settle into the walls like old photographs you can't bring yourself to take down. After my husband Daniel passed from a sudden heart attack, it was just me and my son Ethan. He was 24 at the time, too young to lose his father, but old enough to understand what it meant for both of us. We leaned on each other in a way that only 2 people left behind can. I worked longer hours at the local accounting firm, picked up extra clients during tax season, and made sure the house stayed warm, the bills stayed paid, and Ethan never felt like he had to give up his future because of loss. And he didn't. Ethan grew into a good man, or at least that's what I believed for most of his life. He was kind, attentive, the kind of son who called just to ask if I'd eaten dinner. Every Sunday, without fail, he would come by the house, sit at the same worn oak table his father built, and tell me about his week. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we argued, but never, not once, did I feel like I didn't belong in his life. Not until Vanessa. He met her at a real estate networking event, or at least that's what he told me the first time he brought her over. I remember opening the door and seeing her standing there tall, poised with a kind of effortless confidence that filled the space before she even spoke. She had long, dark hair, a bright smile, and eyes that seemed to assess everything in a split second. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." It was polite, perfect even, but something about it felt rehearsed. Still, I welcomed her. Of course I did. I set the table, brought out my best dishes, made the pot roast recipe Daniel used to love, and did everything I could to make her feel like part of the family. Because that's what you do when your child brings someone home. You open the door. You make room. And for a while, it worked. Vanessa was attentive in those early months. She asked about my work, my garden, even Daniel. She laughed at Ethan's stories, leaned into him in a way that made it clear she adored him. I remember watching them from the kitchen one evening, the way his face softened when he looked at her, and thinking, maybe, just maybe, life was giving him something good after everything we'd lost. So when he told me he was going to propose, I didn't hesitate. I hugged him, cried a little, and told him his father would be proud. What I didn't know then was how quickly things would begin to shift. It started small. After the engagement, Ethan stopped coming by every Sunday. At first, he said it was because they were busy with planning. Venues, guest lists, photographers, all the things that come with building a wedding from scratch. I understood that. I even offered to help. And that's when the money came up. "Mom," he said one evening over the phone, his voice careful in a way I wasn't used to. "We're trying to keep things reasonable, but it's getting expensive." I didn't need him to say more. "I can help," I told him. "Whatever you need." There was a pause on the other end. Then relief. "Really? Of course," I said. "It's your wedding." That's how it began. First, it was the catering. Vanessa had her heart set on a particular company, elegant, upscale, far beyond what Ethan had originally planned. He hesitated when he told me the price, but I could hear the hope underneath it, so I told him I'd cover it. "It'll be my gift," I said. He thanked me 3 times before we hung up. After that, it became easier for them to ask. A little more for floral adjustments, a contribution toward the venue upgrade, deposits that needed to be paid quickly to lock things in. Each time, Ethan asked. Each time I said yes. Not because I felt obligated, because I wanted to be part of it, because I believed that helping them build something beautiful meant I would have a place in it too, and for a while I thought I did. Vanessa would text me updates, pictures of centerpiece ideas, color palettes, snippets of inspiration boards. She would say things like, "What do you think? And I value your opinion." It felt like inclusion, like respect. But looking back now, I realized something important. She never once changed anything based on what I said. My opinions were acknowledged, but never used. At the time, I told myself that was normal, that young couples had their own vision, that my role wasn't to guide but to support. And I was fine with that. Or at least I thought I was. The first moment something truly unsettled me came about 3 months before the wedding. I had been waiting to hear about the dress fitting, not because I expected to choose the dress, but because I assumed naturally I would be invited. When I asked Ethan about it during one of our shorter-than-usual phone calls, there was a brief silence. "Oh," he said, "that already happened." I blinked, surprised. "Already, yeah." Vanessa just kept it small. Her mom, her sister, that kind of thing. That kind of thing. I remember standing in my kitchen, staring at the calendar on the wall, trying to process the fact that something so meaningful had happened and I hadn't even known about it. "I would have loved to be there," I said gently. "Yeah," he replied a little too quickly. It was last minute. Last minute. But nothing about that wedding was last minute. I let it go. Because that's what mothers do when they don't want to cause problems. We let things go. But then it happened again. And again. Planning meetings I wasn't told about. Vendor decisions made without my input even when my money was involved. Conversations that seemed to happen around me, not with me. And slowly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, my role began to change. Not mother, not family. Just contributor. The confirmation came in the most unexpected way. One afternoon I received a call from the catering company, the same one I had paid for. "Hi, Mrs. Bennett," the woman said cheerfully. "We just wanted to confirm the final headcount and menu adjustments for the reception." I paused. "I'm sorry. Final what?" She hesitated. "The final details. We've been trying to reach Vanessa, but since you're listed as the primary contact, not Vanessa, not Ethan, me." I listened as she went through the menu items I hadn't approved changes. I hadn't discussed additions that increased the cost beyond what I had originally agreed to. And as she spoke, something inside me shifted. Because for the first time, it became clear. I wasn't being included. I was being used. I thanked her, told her I would get back to her, and hung up the phone slowly. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, Daniel's table, and stared at the surface, worn smooth by years of family dinners. And I asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. When did I stop being his mother and start being his wallet? I wish I could tell you there was one moment, one clear, undeniable line that I could point to and say that's when everything changed. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter, slower, like a door closing inch by inch while you're still standing inside the room. After the call with the caterer, I started paying closer attention. Not in a suspicious way, not at first, just aware. I began to notice how often my phone stayed silent, how updates came after decisions had already been made, how my role had shifted from being part of the conversation to being the one who made sure the conversation could happen at all. Vanessa still texted me occasionally, but the tone had changed. Before it had been, "What do you think about this?" Now it was, "Just letting you know we went with this." Subtle, polite, but final. One afternoon, she sent me a picture of the reception layout, round tables draped in ivory linen, gold accents, tall floral arrangements that looked like they belonged in a magazine. "It's going to be beautiful," she wrote. I stared at the image for a long moment before replying. "It is. I'm happy for you both." And I meant that. I really did. But what I didn't say was that I hadn't been asked about any of it. Not the colors, not the seating, not even the number of guests, despite the fact that I was the one paying for the meal they would all be eating. A few days later, I ran into Mrs. Holloway at the grocery store. She'd been a neighbor for years, the kind of woman who always knew just enough to make a conversation interesting. "Lucy," she called out, pushing her cart toward me, "I heard about Ethan's wedding." "How exciting it is," I said, smiling. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Vanessa's mother was telling everyone at the club how much work they've put into it, said they practically planned the whole thing themselves." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my expression steady. "I'm sure it's been a team effort," I replied. She said, giving me a look I couldn't quite read. "Well, either way, it sounds like it's going to be quite the event." I nodded, finished my shopping, and drove home in silence. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where everything seemed to land these days, and tried to piece together what was happening. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. And yet every time I considered saying something, really saying something, I stopped myself because I didn't want to be that mother. The difficult one. The one who made things harder for her son during what was supposed to be one of the happiest times of his life. So I stayed quiet. I told myself that love sometimes meant stepping back, that maybe this was just part of letting go. But silence has a way of building pressure, and eventually something has to give. The next incident came during what was supposed to be a simple planning lunch. Vanessa had invited me to meet her and the wedding planner at a small cafe downtown. It was the first time in weeks I'd been included in anything directly related to the wedding, and I'll admit it gave me hope. Maybe things were shifting back. Maybe she realized I wanted to be involved. When I arrived, they were already seated. Vanessa looked up and smiled, that same polished smile I remembered from the first day I met her. "Lucille, you made it," she said. Lucille, not Lucy. Not Mrs. Bennett. Just Lucille. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I sat down, greeted the planner, a young woman named Kelly, and waited for the conversation to begin. For the first 10 minutes, it was all surface level. Timeline updates, guest confirmations, minor adjustments. Then the topic shifted to seating arrangements. Kelly pulled out a chart and began walking us through the layout. "And of course," she said, pointing to a table near the front, "this will be reserved for immediate family." I leaned in slightly, looking at the names. Vanessa's parents, her sister, 2 relatives I didn't recognize, and Ethan. I blinked. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Where am I seated?" There was a brief pause. Kelly glanced at Vanessa. Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Oh," she said lightly, as if it were nothing. "We thought it might be more comfortable if you sat with some of the extended guests. You know, less pressure." Less pressure. I felt my hands go still in my lap. "I don't mind being near family," I replied. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her expression still pleasant, but something underneath it had hardened. "Of course," she said, "but we're trying to keep things balanced. My parents have a lot of people coming, and it's important to us that everyone feels included." Included. The word hung in the air like a quiet contradiction. I looked at Ethan. He had been silent this entire time, staring at the table as if the wood grain held all the answers. "Ethan," I said softly. He glanced up, then quickly away. "It's just seating, Mom," he said. "It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal." I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. And just like that, the conversation moved on. Menus, flowers, music, as if nothing had happened, but something had. Something important. Because in that moment it became clear that this wasn't about oversight or miscommunication. This was intentional, carefully planned, gently delivered, but intentional. After the meeting, I walked to my car alone. The afternoon sun was bright, the kind of light that usually made everything feel a little softer. But that day it felt harsh, exposing. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, and let out a slow breath. I thought about all the things I had said yes to, all the checks I had written, all the times I had swallowed my discomfort for the sake of peace, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being replaced. Not by another mother, but by an image, a version of family that didn't include me. That evening, Ethan called. For a moment, I considered not answering. But I did. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was casual. Careful. "Hi, sweetheart." There was a pause. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "Make sure everything's okay." I almost laughed. "Everything's okay." "Yes," I replied. "Everything's fine." Another pause. "Good," he said. "Vanessa was worried you might have felt uncomfortable today." Uncomfortable. "That's one word for it," I said gently. He didn't respond. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "So, the caterer might reach out again. There are a few final changes." Of course there were. "All right," I said. "Have them contact me directly." "Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it." I closed my eyes for a moment. "You're welcome." After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the weight of everything pressing down in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Because it wasn't just the seating chart, it wasn't just the meetings, it wasn't even just the money. It was the pattern. the steady, deliberate movement of being moved out of my own son's life while still being expected to support it. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question that scared me. What if this doesn't get better? What if this is exactly where they want me, outside, looking in? If there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that the truth rarely arrives all at once. It reveals itself in layers, small moments that don't seem important until you look back and realize they were warning signs all along. That dinner with Vanessa's family was one of those moments. It was held at Robert and Elaine Clark's house, a large, carefully decorated place in an upscale neighborhood about 20 minutes from mine. Everything about it felt curated. The lighting was warm but deliberate, the table set with matching china and folded napkins that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Even the way Elaine greeted me at the door felt practiced. "Lucille," she said with a polite smile, "so glad you could make it. Not warm, not cold, just controlled." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, stepping inside. Vanessa appeared a moment later, dressed effortlessly as always, her arm slipping through Ethan's like it belonged there permanently. "You made it," she said, smiling. There it was again. Not "we're so happy you're here." Just acknowledgement. Ethan kissed my cheek, quickly distracted. "Hey, Mom." And just like that, I was already on the outside of something I hadn't even stepped fully into yet. We sat down at the table shortly after. Robert poured wine, Elaine directed the flow of conversation, and Vanessa guided everything with subtle glances and small shifts in tone. It was almost impressive the way she controlled the room without ever raising her voice. At first, the conversation stayed light. Work, weather, the wedding. Elaine leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We've been putting so much thought into every detail," she said. "It's really coming together beautifully." Robert nodded. "Vanessa's vision has been incredible. Honestly, we couldn't be more proud of what she's created." "What she's created?" I smiled politely, folding my hands in my lap. "I'm sure it will be lovely," I said. Vanessa glanced at me briefly, then back to her parents. "It's been a team effort," she said, though there was no real emphasis behind the words, a team I apparently wasn't part of. Dinner was served, and for a while I focused on small things, the taste of the food, the clink of silverware, the hum of conversation. It was easier than focusing on the quiet imbalance forming at the table. Then somewhere between the main course and dessert, the conversation shifted again. Robert set his fork down and looked at Ethan. So he said, "Have you finalized everything with the vendors?" Ethan nodded. "Almost. Just a few small things left," Vanessa added. "We're just making some last adjustments to the reception details." I hesitated, then spoke. "Well, if you need confirmation on the catering timeline, I can." The silence was immediate. Not loud. Not dramatic. But heavy. Vanessa's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Just slightly. "We've got it covered," she said quickly. "No need to worry about that." I blinked. "I wasn't worried," I replied gently. "I just thought since I've been coordinating with them." "It's handled," she said again, her tone still pleasant but firmer this time. I felt something shift in the room. Ethan cleared his throat. "Yeah, Mom," he said. "We're just trying to keep things simple." "Simple," I nodded slowly. "Of course." Elaine picked up the conversation immediately after steering it in another direction as if nothing had happened, but the damage was already done, because in that moment it became clear. My involvement wasn't just being reduced, it was being erased right in front of me. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite smiles and careful words. I contributed when spoken to, listened when I wasn't, and counted the minutes until it was appropriate to leave. When dessert was finished and chairs began to shift, I stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said. Elaine smiled. "Of course." Vanessa gave me a quick hug, light, brief, almost symbolic. "So glad you came," she said. I nodded. Ethan walked me to the door. For a moment it was just the two of us. "Drive safe, Mom," he said. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man I had raised. At the boy who used to run into my arms after school. At the person who now stood in front of me, distant in a way I couldn't reach. "Ethan," I said quietly, "is everything okay?" He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's fine." I held his gaze a moment longer, searching for something, anything that felt like the son I knew, but whatever I was looking for, I couldn't find it. "All right," I said softly, and then I left. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Streetlights passed in a steady rhythm, illuminating the road just enough to keep moving forward. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, my thoughts circling in a way that refused to settle. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I already knew something had changed. Not just in them, in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was beginning to understand. That night, I didn't go straight inside. I sat on the porch instead, the same place I would later read that message. The air was cool, the neighborhood still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then silence again. I replayed the dinner in my mind. The way Vanessa shut me down. The way Ethan didn't defend me. The way her parents spoke as if I didn't exist. And piece by piece, something came into focus. This wasn't accidental. This was narrative. Carefully built, carefully reinforced. And I was no longer part of it. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Ethan. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. "Mom, please don't bring up vendor stuff again. It's causing unnecessary stress." I read it twice, then a third time. "No, I love you." No explanation. Just instruction. As if I were the problem. As if my presence, my involvement, was something that needed to be managed. I felt a slow, steady ache settle in my chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming. Just deep. Because that message didn't sound like my son. It sounded like something someone else would say. Something rehearsed, something repeated until it became his own. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider something I had been avoiding. What if Ethan wasn't just drifting away? What if he was being guided there? I looked out at the quiet street, the porch light casting a soft glow around me, and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. I wasn't just losing my place in the wedding. I was losing my place in his life. And worse than that, he was letting it happen. The message came 2 nights after that dinner. 9:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had just turned off the television and was about to head to bed. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that settles in when you've lived alone long enough to recognize every creak, every shift in the air. My phone lit up on the coffee table. Ethan. For a brief moment, something inside me lifted. A small, hopeful instinct I hadn't quite managed to bury yet. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe he had thought about what I asked him at the door. Maybe I picked up the phone, and then I read it. "We don't want you at the wedding." That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no softness to cushion the blow. Just a sentence that felt less like communication and more like a decision already made. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at the screen, waiting for the message to somehow change, as if maybe I had misunderstood it. As if maybe there would be a second text, something to follow it up. There wasn't. The room felt colder somehow, though nothing had changed. I read the message again. "We don't want you." Not I. We. That word settled heavily in my chest, because it told me everything I needed to know without saying anything at all. This wasn't hesitation. This wasn't confusion. This was alignment. Ethan and Vanessa together had decided that I didn't belong. I set the phone down slowly and stood up, moving toward the front door without really thinking about it. I stepped outside onto the porch, the same place I had sat just nights before, and lowered myself into the chair. The night air was cool, steady, calm, so different from the quiet storm building inside me. I tried to trace the path that had led here, from Sunday dinners to short phone calls, from being included to being informed, from being valued to being managed, and now to being removed. I thought about Ethan as a little boy, the way he used to reach for my hand when we crossed the street, the way he would run into the house after school calling Mom before he even saw me, the way he cried the night his father died, sitting on the edge of his bed, holding on to me like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. I had promised him, then promised both of us that no matter what happened, we would always have each other. And now, years later, I was sitting alone on a porch reading a message that felt like the breaking of that promise. Not all at once, but completely. The strangest part was how quiet it all felt. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just absence. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Maybe an hour. Time doesn't move the same way when something inside you is trying to catch up to something your mind already understands. Eventually I stood, walked back inside, picked up my phone again, Still no follow-up message. No call, no apology, just that one line sitting there like it had always belonged. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, every conversation, every moment. I had chosen silence over discomfort. And slowly, something shifted. Not in my heart, but in my thinking. Because for the first time, I stopped asking why this was happening to me and started asking something else. What am I going to do about it? Morning came quietly, the same way it always does. Sunlight through the curtains. The hum of the coffee maker. The familiar rhythm of a day that on the surface looked exactly like every other, but nothing felt the same. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, staring at the calendar on the wall. The wedding date circled in blue ink. 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. I thought about the catering, the contract, the deposit, the final payment that had been scheduled, the food that would be served to hundreds of guests, the celebration I had helped build, a celebration I was no longer allowed to attend. I took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down, and reached for my phone. The number was saved. I had spoken to them more than once over the past few months. They answered on the second ring. "Good morning, this is Silver Oak Catering." "Hi," I said, my voice calm, steady in a way that surprised even me. "This is Lucille Bennett. I'm calling about the Bennett-Clark wedding." There was a brief pause. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Bennett," the woman replied warmly. "We were just finalizing some details. I need to cancel the catering." Silence. Not confusion, just stillness. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Did you say cancel?" "Yes." I didn't raise my voice, didn't explain, didn't justify. "I am the one who signed the contract," I continued, "and I am the one who made the payments. I'd like to proceed with cancellation effective immediately." There was a shift in her tone, professional, cautious. "Of course, Mrs. Bennett. We'll need to review the contract terms with you, but yes, as the primary client, you do have that authority." Authority. The word settled differently than I expected. Not heavy, not aggressive. Just clear. "Yes," I said. "I understand there may be fees. There will be a partial loss of deposit," she replied gently. "But we can walk you through the details." That's fine. And it was. Because this wasn't about money anymore. This was about something else entirely. We spent the next few minutes going over logistics, dates, policies, confirmation emails. When the call ended, I placed my phone back on the counter and stood there in the quiet kitchen. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt still, grounded, as if something that had been slowly unraveling had finally come to rest. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't text. I didn't warn anyone. Because for once, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Hours passed. The day moved forward. And then just after noon, my phone rang. Vanessa. Of course it was Vanessa. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello?" "What did you do?" she snapped, skipping any form of greeting. Her voice was sharp, controlled, but barely. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied evenly. "The catering," she said. "They just called. They said it's been canceled." "Yes," I said, "it has." There was a pause, not of confusion, of disbelief. "You can't do that," she said. "I already did." Her breath hitched slightly, like she was trying to regain control of the conversation. "That's incredibly selfish, Lucille." Lucille. Again. Not Lucy, not even Mrs. Bennett, just my name used like a boundary. I let a small silence settle before responding. "If I'm not welcome at the wedding," I said calmly, "then I don't see a reason to continue paying for it." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're trying to punish us," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm accepting your decision." The line went quiet. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift. Not in them, but in me. Because I realized something important in that moment. They expected me to beg, to argue, to fight for a place they had already taken from me. But I wasn't going to do that. I had spent too many years building a life to shrink myself just to stay in someone else's. "You've made things very difficult," Vanessa said finally, her voice colder now. I took a breath, then answered with a calm I didn't know I still had. "So have you." And then I hung up. I didn't expect the silence to last. Not after that call, not after everything that had just happened. But for nearly 2 hours, my phone didn't ring again. No messages, no follow-up, Just a strange, suspended quiet that felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air grows heavy and still and you know something is coming, you just don't know how hard it will hit. I spent that time doing ordinary things. Washing dishes, folding laundry, watering the plants by the kitchen window. But none of it felt ordinary. Because beneath every small movement was the awareness that something had shifted permanently. Not just in what I had done, but in what I was no longer willing to accept. At 2:14 p.m., my phone rang again. Ethan. This time I didn't hesitate. "Hello, Mom, what's going on?" His voice came through fast, uneven, like he had been pacing while dialing. "Vanessa just told me you canceled the catering. Is that true?" "Yes," I said. A sharp exhale. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his tone caught somewhere between anger and panic. I closed my eyes for a brief moment before answering. "You told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding." There was a pause. "That's not," he started, then stopped. "That's not what I meant." I let that sit for a second. "You said, 'We don't want you at the wedding,'" I replied calmly. I'm not sure how else I was supposed to understand that. Another pause. Longer this time. Things have been really stressful," he said finally. "Vanessa's been overwhelmed and there's been tension, and we thought maybe it would be better if I wasn't there." I finished for him. "That's not," he tried again, frustration creeping in. "You're twisting it." "No," I said softly. "I'm hearing it." Silence. I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair the way he used to, when he didn't know what to say. "Mom," he said after a moment, his voice lowering slightly, "canceling the catering, that's a huge deal. You're putting us in a really difficult position." I leaned against the kitchen counter, steadying myself. "I understand that," I said. "Then why would you do it?" he asked again, more quietly this time. "Because I'm not your wallet anymore." The thought came clearly, but I didn't say it like that. Instead, I chose my words carefully. "Because I won't continue funding an event I've been told I'm not welcome to attend." There it was. Simple, direct, true. Ethan didn't respond right away, and in that silence, something else became clear to me. He hadn't expected this. Not really. He had expected me to be hurt, maybe even upset, but not this. Not calm, not decisive. "I think you're overreacting," he said finally. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That word, overreacting. It had been used before, at the cafe, on the phone, in small, dismissive ways that made my feelings seem larger than they were, or perhaps more inconvenient than they were allowed to be. "Am I?" I asked gently. "Yes," he said quickly. "It's just the wedding. It's one day. We're trying to manage a lot of personalities, and I'm not a personality to manage, Ethan," I said quietly. The words landed heavier than I expected, on both of us. There was a pause, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then in the background I heard something. A voice, soft, sharp. "Vanessa." I couldn't make out the exact words, but I didn't need to. I knew that tone. Guiding. Correcting. Positioning. Ethan's next sentence came out different. More controlled. More certain. "Look," he said, "this isn't just about you. There are other people involved, other dynamics. Vanessa's family has had no problem making their place clear." I interrupted, still calm. "I'm simply doing the same." "That's not fair," he said. "Neither is being uninvited from your own son's wedding," I replied. The silence that followed was heavier this time. Not empty. Full. Filled with everything we weren't saying. "I think we should talk about this in person," he said after a moment. I considered that, then shook my head even though he couldn't see it. "I don't think talking is the issue," I said. "I think listening has been." Another pause. Then quietly, "Vanessa thinks you're trying to control things," he said. There it was. Finally. Not hinted. Not softened. Spoken. I let out a slow breath. "Does Vanessa also think I controlled the checks I wrote?" I asked. He didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer to that. Instead, he shifted again. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I straightened slightly, my grip tightening on the edge of the counter. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice still even but firmer now. "I'm making it clear." Silence. "Then, so what, you're just going to walk away?" he asked. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized something in that moment. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about distance, about withdrawal, about punishment. But it wasn't. I'm not walking away from you, I said softly. Another pause. Then what are you doing? He asked. I looked out the kitchen window at the small garden I had tended for years, the one thing in my life that grew exactly the way I nurtured it. I'm stepping out of a place I was told I didn't belong, I said. No anger, no accusation, just truth. The line went quiet again, and this time I could feel something shifting on his end. Not fully, not clearly, but something. Then Vanessa's voice came through again, louder, this time sharper. What is she saying? I heard her ask. Ethan lowered his voice, but not enough. I'll call you back, he said quickly. Ethan, I started, but the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, the silence settling back in around me. Except this time it felt different. Less like waiting, more like aftermath. I placed the phone down slowly, walked over to the sink, turned on the water, and just stood there watching it run. Because the truth was, that conversation hadn't resolved anything. It hadn't fixed the distance between us. It hadn't brought him back to me, but it had done something else, something just as important. It had shown me where I stood, not where I hoped to stand, not where I believed I should stand, but where I actually stood. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. My phone buzzed again on the counter. A message this time. From Vanessa. I hesitated before picking it up, then opened it. I hope you realize what you've done. This isn't something we'll forget. I read it once, then again, and for a brief moment I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger, not fear. Something steadier, stronger. I typed my response slowly, carefully, then hit send. Neither is what you did. I set the phone down, turned off the water, and walked out of the kitchen. Because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't waiting for them to decide my place anymore. That night I expected to feel something dramatic, anger, regret, maybe even fear. But what I felt instead was something quieter, clarity. Not the kind that makes everything easier, but the kind that makes everything undeniable. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to explain their behavior away. I wasn't softening it, reframing it, or finding reasons to excuse it. I was simply seeing it. And once you see something clearly, you can't pretend it's something else. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still, the kind of stillness that used to feel lonely but now felt almost protective. I made coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and sat in the same chair where everything seemed to unfold these days. I hadn't heard from Ethan again. Not a call, not a message. And strangely, that silence didn't surprise me, because I knew he wasn't alone in his decisions anymore. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. Diane. I hadn't spoken to her in a couple of weeks, but we'd known each other long enough that time didn't matter much. She had been there through Daniel's passing, through Ethan's college years, through all the quiet chapters in between. Lucy, she said as soon as I answered. Are you all right? I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see me. I'm managing, I said. There was a pause. I heard about the catering, she said gently. Of course she had. In a town like ours, news didn't travel fast, but it traveled thoroughly. Yes, I replied. Another pause. Then carefully, I'm glad you did it. That caught me off guard. Are you? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. Because from what I've been seeing, Lucy, something's not right. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my attention sharpening. What do you mean, Diane? Hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I wasn't sure whether to say anything, she admitted. I didn't want to make things worse. But after what happened, I think you need to know. A quiet tension settled in my chest. Know what I saw, Vanessa, she said. About 2 weeks ago. That's not unusual, I replied lightly. She's been busy with the wedding. No, Diane said softly. Not like that. There was something in her tone that made me sit up straighter, where I asked, Downtown, she said, near that Italian place on Maple Street. I frowned slightly. That's not far from Ethan's office. I know, she said. That's why I didn't think much of it at first. But Lucy, she wasn't alone. A slow, uneasy feeling began to settle in. Who was she with? I don't know, Diane admitted, but it wasn't Ethan. The words landed quietly, but heavily. She could have been meeting someone for work, I said, though even to my own ears the explanation sounded thin. Diane didn't respond immediately. Then I thought that too, she said. At first, but Lucy, they weren't acting like coworkers. My grip tightened slightly on the arm of the chair. What do you mean? I mean, Diane said carefully. They were close. Too close. Holding hands. Laughing in a way that didn't look professional. And when they left, she paused. When they left, I prompted. They got into the same car, she said. And it wasn't Ethan's. Silence stretched between us. Not awkward, not uncertain. Just full. Full of implications neither of us wanted to rush into naming. I didn't say anything before Diane continued, because I thought maybe I was wrong, or maybe there was an explanation. But after hearing what she said to you, after what Ethan texted, she exhaled softly. I don't think you're the problem here, Lucy. I stared out at the quiet street in front of my house, my mind moving slowly through what she had just told me. Vanessa. With another man. 2 weeks ago, before the catering was canceled, before the message, before everything finally broke open. Did Ethan know? I asked quietly. I have no idea, Diane said. But if he didn't, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to, because I already knew what she was thinking, what I was thinking. If Ethan didn't know, then everything he had said to me, everything he had believed about me had been built on something false, manipulated, controlled. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle. I don't want to jump to conclusions, I said after a moment. I know, Diane replied gently. And you shouldn't. But you also shouldn't ignore it. She was right. Of course she was right. But knowing something is possible and accepting that it might be true are two very different things. Do you have any proof? I asked. There was a brief pause. Actually, yes. That made my heart skip. I didn't mean to, she added quickly. I was taking a picture of the storefront. My niece wanted to see the place and they were in the background. My breath slowed. Can you send it to me? I already did, she said softly. I looked down at my phone. Sure enough, there it was. A message from Diane. An image. I hesitated for just a second before opening it. The photo wasn't focused on them. It was slightly angled, centered on the restaurant's entrance. But there, just off to the side, Vanessa, standing close to a man I didn't recognize, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Her face turned toward him in a way I had never seen when she looked at Ethan. Relaxed, unfiltered, intimate. I stared at the image longer than I expected to, not searching for details, but trying to understand what I was feeling, because it wasn't outrage, it wasn't even shock, it was something quieter, heavier, like a puzzle piece finally sliding into place. This could still be explained, I said, though my voice had lost some of its certainty. It could, Diane agreed, but Lucy, you need to ask yourself something. What if everything was as simple as they've been telling you? Would you feel this uneasy I didn't answer right away? Because the truth was, no, I wouldn't. If this were just stress, if this were just wedding tension, if this were just me overreacting, then none of this would feel like this. But it did. It had been building for months, and now, for the first time, I could see why. I don't want to become someone who accuses without knowing, I said quietly. You're not accusing, Diane replied. You're noticing. That word stayed with me. Noticing. Not judging. Not attacking. Just seeing. After we hung up, I remained on the porch, the phone still in my hand, the image still open on the screen. Vanessa, smiling at someone else, holding someone else, while planning a wedding with my son, while accepting money from me, while slowly pushing me out of the picture, and suddenly everything felt different. Not clearer, but sharper. Because now, the question wasn't just, why was I excluded? It was something else. Something deeper. What kind of life was Ethan about to walk into? And did he even know what he was walking into at all? I didn't confront anyone right away. Not Ethan, not Vanessa, not even Diane again. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stepped back, not emotionally, that part of me was already too involved, but mentally. I needed to see the full picture, not just the pieces that hurt the most, because if I moved too quickly, if I reacted without understanding, I risked becoming exactly what Vanessa had already painted me to be. Difficult, controlling, unreasonable, and I refused to give her that. So I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, a pen, and a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, and I started writing things down. Dates, conversations, payments, moments that hadn't felt right at the time, but that I had dismissed. At first, it felt excessive, even a little ridiculous. But as the list grew, so did something else: clarity. The engagement timeline had always seemed fast, but now it looked rushed. Ethan had proposed barely 8 months after meeting Vanessa. The wedding was scheduled less than a year after that. At the time, I told myself that people move quickly when they know what they want. Now I wasn't so sure. I flipped back through my notes. 3 months after the engagement, that was when the first major financial request came in. The catering. Vanessa had been very specific about that. Not expensive, booked quickly. At the time, I thought it was about taste. Now it looked more like urgency. Then came the venue upgrade. Originally, Ethan had mentioned something modest, a smaller location, fewer guests. But suddenly plans changed. Vanessa had found something better, bigger, more impressive, more expensive. And once again, there had been pressure to secure it quickly because dates were filling up. I underlined that phrase in my notebook. Dates were filling up. It sounded reasonable, but it had also removed time. Time to think, time to question, time to say no. I turned the page. Next, financial conversations. Ethan had always been responsible with money, careful, thoughtful, the kind of man who asked questions before making decisions. But over the past few months, something had shifted. He had started making payments more quickly. Less discussion, less hesitation. There were a few times he had even asked me for help covering expenses he couldn't fully explain. At the time, it just made sense, he had said once. But now it didn't. Because none of those expenses had ever been clearly outlined. They were always vague, flexible, urgent. I tapped the pen lightly against the table, then wrote another word: prenup. I remembered that conversation clearly. It had happened about 4 months ago during one of Ethan's rare visits to the house. We had been sitting at the same table, the late afternoon sun filtering through the window when he brought it up. I was thinking about maybe getting a prenup, he had said almost casually. I hadn't pushed. I hadn't encouraged. I had simply nodded. That's something you should think through carefully, I told him. It's not about trust, it's about protection. He had agreed. At least in that moment he had. But 2 weeks later, the topic came up again and his tone had changed. Vanessa doesn't think it's necessary, he said. I remember pausing. Why not? He shrugged, though it felt rehearsed. She says it sets the wrong tone, like we're expecting things to fail. I studied him then. Do you agree with that? Another shrug. I don't know. Maybe. That word had stayed with me, because it didn't sound like Ethan. It sounded like someone trying to align with a decision that wasn't originally his. I looked down at my notes again. One by one, the pieces were forming something I couldn't ignore anymore. Fast timeline, financial pressure, control over decisions, resistance to legal protection. And now, another man. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Because when you step back far enough, patterns don't just appear. They become undeniable. My phone buzzed softly beside me. For a moment, I thought it might be Ethan. It wasn't. It was a message from one of the vendors, a florist this time. Hi, Mrs. Bennett just confirming final payment details for the upgraded arrangements Vanessa selected. Upgraded. Again. I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. Please send me the full invoice and change history. The response came quickly. Of course, within minutes the documents arrived. I opened them, and there it was. A series of changes, each one increasing the cost. Each one approved under Vanessa's name, but billed to me. No discussion. No confirmation. Just assumption. I set the phone down slowly. Because now the picture wasn't just emotional, it was practical, structured, intentional. This wasn't someone getting carried away with wedding planning. This was someone who understood exactly where the money was coming from and felt no hesitation using it. I stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the small garden I had spent years tending. Every plant had been placed carefully, every change made with intention. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Because growth takes time, and anything that demands speed often has a reason for it. My thoughts drifted back to the photo. Vanessa. smiling at another man, relaxed in a way I had never seen with Ethan. And suddenly another question surfaced. Not just why was she doing this, but how long has she been doing this? And more importantly, what happens after the wedding? I returned to the table, my mind sharper now, more focused. Because if everything I was seeing was true, then this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about what came after. Shared accounts, property decisions, legal ties, commitments that would be much harder to undo once they were in place. I thought about Ethan, about the way he had sounded on the phone, frustrated, defensive, confused, not like someone in control, like someone trying to keep up. And for the first time, my anger shifted, not toward him, but toward the situation he was in, because if I was right, then he wasn't just pushing me away. He was being positioned, and the moment that positioning was complete, he might lose far more than just a relationship with me. He might lose everything. I picked up my phone again, opening the photo Diane had sent. I studied it more closely this time. The man beside Vanessa Mark Reynolds, Diane had called him, looked comfortable, familiar, not like someone new, like someone who had been there longer than he should have been. I zoomed in slightly, watched the way Vanessa leaned toward him, the way her body language softened, and I knew this wasn't recent. This wasn't accidental. This was ongoing. I lowered the phone slowly, because now the question wasn't whether something was wrong. That part was already clear. The question was, what was I going to do with the truth? Because I had a choice. Stay silent. Let the wedding happen. Let Ethan walk into something he didn't fully understand. Or speak, risk pushing him even further away. Risk becoming exactly what Vanessa had already told him I was. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that decision settle in. Because this wasn't just about being right. It was about being heard. And right now, I wasn't sure he was ready to listen. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it might cost. There's a difference between suspicion and truth. Suspicion leaves room for denial, for comfort, for delay. But once something begins to look like truth, you're forced into a decision. Act or stay silent and live with what follows. And I had already stayed silent for too long. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to accuse. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to give Ethan a chance to see it for himself. That was the only way this would mean anything. I picked up my phone around 8:30 a.m. and stared at his name for a moment before pressing call. It rang longer than usual. Once, twice, 3 times. Then finally, hello. His voice sounded tired, flat. Ethan, I said softly, I need to see you. A pause. Mom, I don't think it's important, I said, still calm. Not about the catering. Not about the wedding. Just us. Silence. Then a quiet exhale, where there was hesitation in his voice. Resistance, but not refusal. That diner on Route 40, I said, the one we used to go to after your baseball games. Another pause. Today, yes. More silence. Then finally, all right. That was all. No warmth, no reassurance, but he didn't say no. And for now, that was enough. The diner hadn't changed much. Same faded red booths, same hum of conversation. Same smell of coffee and something frying in the kitchen. I arrived early and chose a booth near the window. Old habit. I liked seeing people before they saw me. It gave me a moment to prepare. I ordered coffee but didn't drink it. Just sat there, hands wrapped around the mug, watching the door. Ethan walked in exactly 12 minutes late. Not that I was counting, but I was. He looked different. Not physically, not in a way anyone else might notice, but to me, he looked worn. Like something inside him had been stretched too thin. He spotted me quickly and walked over, sliding into the seat across from me without a word. Hi, I said gently. Hi. That was it. No hug, no smile. Just distance, sitting between us like a third person at the table. A waitress came by, asked if he wanted anything. Black coffee, he said. When she left, the silence returned, thicker this time. He leaned back slightly, arms crossing, so he said, "What's this about? Straight to it." No pretense. I nodded slowly. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "Good," he replied quickly. Because I'm not in the mood for that. I let that pass. I just want to ask you something, I continued. He shrugged. Okay. I held his gaze. Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. I could see it. Not because it was complicated, but because it was simple. Too simple. What kind of question is that? He said. A real one, I replied. He shifted, slightly uncomfortable. Of course I'm happy, he said. I'm getting married. I didn't respond right away, just watched him. Are you sure? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. Mom, I'm not questioning your choices, I said gently. I'm asking how you feel. He looked away for a moment toward the window, then back at me. I feel fine, he said. Fine. That word again. Neutral. Safe. Empty. I nodded slowly. Okay. The waitress returned with his coffee. He thanked her, took a sip, then set the cup down a little harder than necessary. If this is about the catering, he started. It's not, I interrupted. Another pause. Then what is it? I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Not dramatically. Not like evidence. Just deliberately. I want you to check something, I said. He frowned slightly. What? I placed the phone on the table but didn't slide it toward him yet. 2 weeks ago, I said. Tuesday afternoon. Around 3:30. His expression shifted slightly. What about it? Where was Vanessa? Immediate reaction. Defensive. How am I supposed to know that exactly? You don't, I said calmly, but you can find out. He stared at me. What are you getting at? I met his gaze. I'm not going to tell you what I think I said. I want you to look at her calendar, her messages, anything from that day. His eyes narrowed. Why? Because she was with another man. Because she's lying to you. Because this wedding might not be what you think it is. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, because something doesn't add up. He leaned back again, crossing his arms tighter this time. This is exactly what Vanessa was talking about, he said. I stayed still. What do you mean? That you're trying to create problems, he replied. That you can't let things be. I felt the words, but I didn't react to them. I'm not creating anything, I said quietly. I'm asking you to look. I trust her, he said quickly. I know you do. Then why would I go digging through her stuff like that? Because you trust her, I said again. Not blindly, but honestly. He shook his head slightly. This is ridiculous. Maybe it sounded that way. Maybe it even looked that way. But something in his voice, something small, had shifted. Not belief. Not yet. But doubt. Tiny. Barely there. But present. I leaned forward just slightly. Ethan, I said softly, if I'm wrong, then nothing changes. He didn't respond. If I'm wrong, I continued, you walk out of here, you marry her, and you never have to think about this again. He swallowed slightly. And if you're not, he asked quietly. I held his gaze. Then you deserve to know before it's too late. Silence. Long, heavy, different from before. Because now, he was thinking. Not reacting, not defending, thinking. His fingers tapped lightly against the coffee cup. Once, twice, then stopped. This is insane, he muttered, but not with the same certainty as before. I didn't push, didn't add more, just let the moment sit. Because this wasn't about convincing him. It was about opening a door, and whether he walked through it, that had to be his choice. Finally, he stood. I have to go, he said. I nodded. Okay. He hesitated for a brief second. Then I'll look at it, he said. Not a promise. But not a refusal either. I watched him turn and walk toward the door, and just before he reached it, he paused. Only for a second, then kept going. I sat there for a long time after he left. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. The diner noise faded into the background, because I knew something important had just happened. Not a confrontation, not a resolution, but a shift. Small, fragile, but real. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't just hearing Vanessa's voice. He had heard mine. And whether he admitted it or not, it had reached him. The hardest part wasn't what I had said to Ethan. It was what came after. Waiting. There is a particular kind of waiting that comes when you've done all you can, and the outcome no longer belongs to you. It doesn't feel passive. It feels suspended, like standing at the edge of something you can't control. That's where I found myself. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't send the photo Diane had given me. Because if Ethan was going to see the truth, it had to come from his own hands, not mine. Still, that didn't make it easier. The first day passed in silence. Then the second. By the third, I had started to question whether he would follow through at all. Whether he had walked out of that diner and simply chosen not to look. Chosen the easier path. Chosen her. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned parts of the house that didn't need cleaning. Reorganized drawers. Rearranged bookshelves I hadn't touched in years. Anything to quiet the constant loop of thoughts circling in my mind. But every time my phone lit up, every time I heard a notification, my heart would lift just slightly, and then fall again when it wasn't him. By the fourth day, something changed. Not in me, in the world around them. I heard about it first from a vendor. The same catering company I had canceled called me not about reinstating anything but to clarify something else. "Mrs. Bennett," the woman said cautiously, "we've been contacted again regarding the wedding." I leaned against the counter, already sensing where this was going. "By Vanessa?" I asked. "Yes," she said. She wanted to see if the cancellation could be reversed under a different account. A small, quiet understanding settled in, and I asked. "We explained that the contract was originally signed under your name," she said. "And due to the timeline, reinstatement would require a full new agreement and immediate payment." Immediate payment! I almost smiled. "And did they agree?" I asked. There was a slight hesitation. "No," she said. "There seemed to be some disagreement." Of course there was, because for the first time the structure Vanessa had built, the one that relied on my quiet compliance, was collapsing, and she didn't know how to rebuild it without me. "Thank you for letting me know," I said calmly. "Of course." After the call ended, I set the phone down and stood there for a moment. Not satisfied, not vindicated, just aware. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. And consequences don't need to be loud to be effective. Later that afternoon, Diane called again. "Well," she asked the moment I answered. I exhaled softly. "Nothing yet." "That's not entirely true," she said. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean I ran into someone this morning?" she said. "Kelly, the wedding planner." My attention sharpened. "And she looked stressed," Diane continued. "More than stressed, actually. She mentioned that things have been getting complicated. Vendors pulling back payments, not lining up last-minute changes." I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. "That makes sense. But that's not all," Diane added. A pause. "What else?" she said. "Vanessa has been difficult," Diane said carefully. "Demanding changes, pushing timelines, insisting on things that don't quite add up." A familiar feeling settled in my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. "She's trying to hold everything together," I said. "At what cost?" Diane asked. That question lingered. Because I didn't have an answer. Not yet. That night I sat in my living room, the lights low, the television on, but muted. I wasn't watching it, just letting it fill the silence. My phone sat beside me, still, unmoved, until it rang. Ethan. For a moment I didn't breathe. Then I picked it up. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end. Not empty. Heavy. "Mom." His voice was different. Not rushed. Not defensive. Something else. Quieter. "Yes," I said gently. Another pause. Then, "Can I come over?" The question caught me off guard. Not because of what it meant, but because of how it was asked. Not like before. Not like someone expecting to be let in. Like someone unsure. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. And then he hung up. No explanation. No context. Just that. I stood up slowly, my heart beginning to move faster, not in panic but in anticipation. Because I knew something had changed. I didn't rush to clean, didn't prepare anything elaborate. I just made 2 cups of coffee and waited. Exactly 23 minutes later, his car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as he sat there for a moment before getting out. That alone told me everything. Ethan never hesitated at my door. Not before. He stepped out, slowly closed the car door, and walked up the path like he wasn't entirely sure what he was walking into. I opened the door before he knocked. For a second, we just looked at each other. And in that moment, I saw it. The shift. The doubt. The crack in everything he had been holding on to. "Hi," I said softly. "Hi." He stepped inside. The house felt smaller somehow, with both of us in it again. Or maybe it just felt more real. I gestured toward the living room. "Sit," I said. He nodded and walked in, lowering himself onto the couch. I handed him a cup of coffee. "Thanks." We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just heavy. Then finally I checked, he said. 3 words. But they carried everything. I nodded once. And he looked down at the cup in his hands. For a long time he didn't speak. Then she lied. The words came out quiet, flat, like they had already settled into him. I didn't interrupt, didn't ask for details, because I knew he would tell me when he was ready. And after a moment, he did. She said she had a client meeting that afternoon, he continued. Said it ran late. That's why she didn't answer my calls. His jaw tightened slightly. But there was no meeting. A pause. No client. His grip on the cup tightened, and when I checked her messages, he stopped, swallowed, then finished. She was with someone else. Silence filled the room. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was clear. Because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, my heart steady in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Don't be." He looked up at me then. Really looked. For the first time in weeks. "You tried to tell me," he said. I didn't respond right away. Because this wasn't about being right. It was about what came next. "I wanted you to see it for yourself," I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." A long pause. Then, "There's more." I felt my breath slow. "What do you mean?" He leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling for a moment before speaking again. "It's not just that," he said. His voice was different now. Not just hurt, not just confused, but something deeper, more serious. "I think," he hesitated, then said it. "I think this whole thing was planned." The words settled between us. And in that moment, I knew. We weren't just dealing with betrayal anymore. We were standing at the edge of something much bigger. I didn't speak right away. Not because I didn't understand what Ethan was saying, but because I did. Too well. "I think this whole thing was planned." The words echoed in the quiet of the room, settling into places neither of us had wanted to go before now. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "I didn't see it before," he said, his voice low. "Or maybe I just didn't want to." I watched him carefully. This wasn't the defensive son from a few days ago. This was someone unraveling. "What changed?" I asked gently. He let out a slow breath, then ran a hand through his hair. "At first it was just the messages," he said. "The ones from that day. I found them between her and him." "Mark," I asked. His head snapped toward me slightly. "You know his name?" "I didn't before," I said. "But Diane mentioned it." He nodded slowly as if that detail no longer surprised him. "Yeah. Mark Reynolds," he said. "That's him." The name sat heavily in the air. "Go on," I said softly. Ethan swallowed. "They've been talking for months," he continued. "Not just casually, not just catching up." He let out a hollow laugh. "Planning things." My chest tightened slightly. "What kind of things?" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I didn't want to believe it," he said, "even when I saw it." He unlocked the screen, scrolled for a moment, then turned it toward me. "I took screenshots," he added quietly. I looked down. The messages were clear, intimate, familiar, and worse than that, strategic. "Once everything's finalized, it'll be easier. He trusts me. It won't be complicated. We just need to get through the wedding." My breath slowed. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. Because everything I had suspected was now right there, in black and white. Ethan pulled the phone back, his expression tightening. "She wasn't just seeing him," he said. "She was coordinating with him." The word felt deliberate, carefully chosen. "What about?" I asked. He let out a shaky breath. "My finances," he said. That landed harder than anything else. "She knew exactly what I had," he continued. "What I didn't. What I could access after we got married." He looked down again, his voice dropping further. "She even mentioned the house." My stomach turned slightly. "What house?" "The one she wanted us to buy," he said. "The one she kept pushing for." I remembered that, the urgency, the pressure. "It was never about us living there," he added. A pause. "It was about equity, The word felt cold, precise, calculated. And Mark, I asked quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. He's in real estate development, he said. I looked him up. That explained more than I wanted it to. They were planning something, Ethan continued. I don't know all the details yet, but enough. He exhaled slowly, enough to know I wasn't part of the plan. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. Not uncertain, not tense, just heavy with truth. I'm so sorry, I said softly. He shook his head immediately. No, he said. You don't get to apologize for this. His eyes met mine again. I should have listened to you. I held his gaze. You needed to see it, I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he whispered. I did. A long pause settled between us. Then, there's more, he said again. I felt my chest tighten slightly. What else? He leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment before speaking. She talked about you. That didn't surprise me, but it still hurt. What did she say? He hesitated, then answered, that you were in the way. The words landed quietly, but they cut deeper than I expected. She said you were too involved, he continued, too controlling, that if we didn't set boundaries now, you'd always be part of every decision. I closed my eyes briefly, not to block it out, just to absorb it. She said uninviting you was necessary, he added. Necessary. That word lingered, because it meant intention, purpose, design. And you believed her, I said softly. It wasn't an accusation, just truth. Ethan didn't look away this time. Yes, he said. The honesty in that single word hurt more than anything else. But it also mattered, because it meant he wasn't hiding anymore. She made it sound reasonable, he continued, like we were just creating space. I nodded slowly, and now he let out a long breath. Now I see what it really was. A pause. It wasn't about space. He looked at me again. It was about control. There it was, fully formed, fully understood. And the wedding, I asked. His expression shifted. Something darker, more resolved. I don't think it was ever meant to last, he said. The words hung in the air. What do you mean? He leaned forward again, his voice steady now. I think the wedding was just the beginning, he said. A way to make everything official. To make things harder to undo. I felt a chill move through me, and after that he didn't hesitate. I think she was planning to leave. The simplicity of it made it worse. Take what she could, he added, and walk away. Silence. Long, heavy, final. Because at that point, there was nothing left to question. Only what to do next. What are you going to do? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the garden. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to know. Lost, thinking, trying to make sense of something too big to hold all at once. I don't know, he said finally. Honest, raw. I feel like everything I thought I had wasn't real. I stood slowly, giving him space but not distance. That doesn't mean everything is gone, I said gently. He let out a soft, humorless laugh. It kind of feels like it is. I didn't argue, because sometimes feelings like that need to exist before they can change. You still have choices, I said instead. He nodded slightly. Yeah. A pause. Then I'm supposed to marry her in 5 days. The words hit differently now. Not exciting. Not hopeful. Just heavy. What do you want to do? I asked. He turned back toward me, and for the first time since he walked in, there was clarity in his eyes. Not complete, not easy, but real. I don't think I can go through with it, he said. My breath slowed. Then don't, I said softly. Another pause. Then I need to confront her, he added. I nodded. You do. He looked at me for a long moment. And I need to do it myself. I held his gaze. I know. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was steady. Because for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't being guided. He was choosing, and whatever happened next would come from him. Ethan didn't leave right away. After everything he had just said, everything he had finally allowed himself to see, he stood there by the window like he wasn't quite ready to step back into the world outside. And I understood that. Because once the truth settles in, the hardest part isn't discovering it. It's deciding what to do with it. "Do you want to sit?" I asked gently. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and returned to the couch. This time his posture was different. Less defensive, less closed off, like something inside him had loosened even if the weight of everything hadn't gone anywhere. "I keep thinking I missed something," he said quietly, staring down at his hands. Like there was a moment where I should have known, where I should have stopped it. I sat across from him, my voice steady. "There probably were moments," I said, "but that doesn't mean you failed." He let out a short breath. "It feels like I did." I didn't rush to correct him, because sometimes guilt is part of clarity. Instead, I said, "You trusted someone you loved. That's not failure. That's being human." He didn't respond right away, but I could see it land. Not as comfort. Not yet, but as something he might come back to later. After a moment, he looked up at me. "I said things to you," he said. "Things I can't take back." I held his gaze. "Yes," I said softly. The honesty didn't hurt him, it grounded him. "I didn't just stay quiet," he continued. "I agreed with her. I let her talk about you like you were a problem." The word lingered. "I know," I said. His expression tightened. "And then I sent that message," he added, his voice dropping slightly. "I didn't even call. I didn't even give you a chance to respond. I felt the memory of it sharp, immediate. But I didn't let it take over." "You didn't," I said calmly. Silence. "Then I don't know how to fix that," he admitted. There it was. Not denial. Not justification. Just truth. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap. "You don't fix it all at once," I said, "and you don't fix it with words." He looked at me searching. "Then how?" "You start by being honest," I said, "and then you stay that way." He nodded slowly. "That's it. It's not simple," I replied, "but it is clear." A long pause followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. Because for the first time in a long time, we weren't avoiding anything. We were sitting in it. Together. "I thought I was protecting something," he said after a moment. "The relationship, the future, the life we were building." He shook his head slightly, but I wasn't protecting anything. I was just going along with it. I watched him carefully. "That's a hard thing to realize," I said. "Yeah," he murmured. Another pause. Then he looked up again. "Did you ever think about just letting it happen?" he asked. The question caught me slightly off guard. "What do you mean, just staying quiet?" he clarified. "Letting the wedding happen, not saying anything, not canceling anything." I considered that. Then nodded. "Yes," I said honestly. "I did." He frowned slightly. "Why didn't you?" I held his gaze. "Because I realized something," I said. "What?" "That staying quiet wouldn't protect you," I replied. "It would just protect the situation." He absorbed that slowly. "And I couldn't do that," I added. His eyes softened slightly. "For me?" he asked. "For both of us," I said. That seemed to settle something in him. Not completely, but enough. Another stretch of silence followed, quieter, this time less heavy. "Then I'm going to talk to her tonight," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice now, just decision. I nodded. "Okay. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say," he admitted. "You don't have to plan every word I said. Just stay in the truth." He gave a small, almost tired smile. "That's new for me lately." I didn't smile back, but there was warmth in my voice. "It's not too late." He nodded again, then stood. This time, there was no hesitation in his movement. Just purpose. "I should go," he said. I walked him to the door. Not out of habit, but because it felt right. We stood there for a moment, facing each other, and for the first time since all of this began, there was no distance between us. Not gone, but not in control. "I'm sorry," he said again. I looked at him carefully. "I know," I replied. That was enough. For now. He stepped outside, then paused on the porch. "Mom, yes, if I had never found out," he said slowly, "would you have told me?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth deserved more than a quick response. "I would have tried," I said finally. He nodded, then added, "Even if it meant losing me," I met his gaze. Yes, that answer didn't push him away. It grounded him, because it told him something he hadn't fully understood before. That love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's honest, even when it risks everything. He took a slow breath. "Okay," he said. Then he walked to his car. I stood on the porch as he drove away, watching until the car disappeared at the end of the street, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like I was waiting anymore. That evening felt longer than the others, not because of uncertainty, but because I knew something was about to break open. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't check in, because whatever happened next had to come from him. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. Not empty, not heavy, just still. Around 9:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message. Ethan. I opened it slowly. It's worse than I thought. I stared at the words for a moment, my chest tightening slightly. Then another message came. I'm going to the wedding. My heart skipped. Then, but not the way she expects. I read that line twice, not in fear, not in confusion, but in understanding, because I knew what that meant. This wasn't over, not yet. In fact, it was just beginning. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange kind of stillness. Not the joyful, bustling energy I remembered from other weddings. No nervous excitement, no last-minute laughter echoing through the air. Instead, it felt suspended, like something was holding its breath. I woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun fully rose. For a few moments I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house, trying to steady myself. I wasn't supposed to be there. That had been made very clear. And yet, everything about that day felt tied to me in ways no one could undo. I made coffee out of habit, though I barely drank it. My hands moved automatically, pouring, stirring, setting the cup down while my mind stayed fixed on one thing. Ethan. His message from the night before replayed over and over. I'm going to the wedding, but not the way she expects. He hadn't called after that, hadn't explained, hadn't said anything more. And I hadn't asked, because I knew this part, this moment, I belonged to him. Still, that didn't make it easier to sit there and wait. By mid-morning, I gave up on pretending I could focus on anything else. I stepped outside onto the porch, the air cool and crisp, the sky brightening slowly above me. Somewhere across town, guests would be arriving, music would be starting, smiles would be exchanged, and beneath all of it, a truth was waiting to be exposed. I didn't know exactly how Ethan planned to do it, but I knew him. And I knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't walk into that room the same man who had walked out of my house days before. I wasn't at the venue, but I heard about everything, piece by piece, call by call. Because in a town like ours, news doesn't stay contained, it spreads, and that day, it spread fast. The first call came from Diane. Lucy, she said, her voice already tight with tension. Are you sitting down? I exhaled slowly. I am. Good, she said, because something just happened. I didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. I just listened. The ceremony hasn't started yet, she said. Guests are seated. Everyone's waiting. Vanessa's already at the front, her parents beside her. Everything looks normal. A pause. Then Ethan walked in. My heart tightened, and I asked softly. He didn't go to the front, she said. That alone told me everything had already changed. He stopped halfway down the aisle, Diane continued. Just stood there. I could picture it. The silence, the confusion, the shift in the room. What did he do? I asked. He asked for a microphone. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. He said he needed to say something before the ceremony. She went on. At first, people thought it was just nerves, or maybe something emotional. Another pause. But it wasn't. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. What did he say? Diane exhaled slowly. He said, I can't marry someone who isn't honest with me. The words landed with quiet force. I didn't speak. Couldn't. He didn't yell, she added. Didn't accuse. Just said it. And Vanessa, I asked. She tried to laugh it off at first, Diane said. Said he was joking, that he was just overwhelmed. I could hear the disbelief in her voice. But then he pulled out his phone. A slow breath moved through me, and he told her to explain. She continued. Silence filled the space between us. What happened next? I asked. Diane hesitated, then said, It got ugly. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Vanessa started denying everything she said he was misunderstanding things, that the messages didn't mean what he thought. I could imagine it, The deflection, the control. But he didn't back down, she added. Of course he didn't. He just stood there, she said. Calm, steady, and then he said, she paused. He said, then explain, Mark. The name hung in the air, heavy, final. And that's when everything changed, Diane said. I didn't need her to explain, because I already knew. She couldn't, Diane continued. Not really. She tried to turn it around, said he was invading her privacy, said he was being paranoid, a familiar pattern. But people were already whispering, she added. You could feel it. The room shifted. Of course it did, because truth has a way of doing that, even when it's quiet. Her parents stepped in, Diane said, tried to calm things down, said it wasn't the place for this conversation. I let out a slow breath. And Ethan, he shook his head, she said. Another pause. Then he said, this is exactly the place. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, not sadness, something else. Recognition. He told them he wasn't going through with the wedding, Diane said. The words settled. Not explosive, not dramatic, just final. And then I asked quietly. He walked out. Silence followed. Long. Still. As if even the world itself needed a moment to absorb what had just happened. Vanessa started crying, Diane added. Or at least, trying to. I didn't respond. Because I knew the difference between real emotion and performance. Some people left right away, she continued. Others stayed trying to figure out what happened. But Lucy, her voice softened. That wedding is over. I closed my eyes. Let the words settle. Not with satisfaction, not with relief, but with something quieter, something deeper. Truth. Thank you for telling me, I said gently. Of course, Diane replied. We ended the call shortly after. And I sat there on the porch, the phone still in my hand, the morning now fully turned into day. It was done. Not the way anyone had planned, not the way anyone had expected, but done. The wedding that had been built so carefully, so deliberately, had collapsed in a single moment of honesty. And the strangest part was, it didn't feel chaotic. It felt inevitable, because something built on lies eventually breaks. Not always loudly, but completely. I didn't know where Ethan was, didn't know what he was feeling, didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing. He had chosen, not Vanessa, not the illusion, the truth. And that mattered. More than the wedding, more than the money, more than everything that had been lost along the way. Because for the first time in a long time, my son had found his way back to himself. The silence after the wedding was louder than anything that had happened before it. No music, no celebration, no carefully curated smiles or polite conversations, just aftermath, the kind that doesn't announce itself but settles into everything. By the afternoon, my phone had already started ringing again. Not from Ethan, but from people who had been there. People who had seen what happened and needed to talk about it, process it, understand it. I didn't answer most of them. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew. The truth had come out, and now everyone would decide what to do with it. Around 3 o'clock, Diane called again. Lucy, she said softly, are you okay? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the quiet living room around me. I think I am, I replied. There was a pause. It's all over town, she said. People are talking. I nodded slowly. I figured. Some are saying Ethan did the right thing, she continued. Others, not so much. I almost smiled. That doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't, she agreed. But I thought you should know. I appreciate that, I said. Another pause. Then Vanessa's parents are furious, Diane added. That didn't surprise me either. With Ethan, I asked. With everyone, she said. But especially you. I let out a small breath. Of course they are. They're saying you caused this, she continued. That you interfered. That you manipulated Ethan into turning against Vanessa. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was, the version of the story that would make everything simpler for them. She's been telling people that for weeks, I said quietly. Diane didn't respond right away. Then I don't believe that, she said. I know, I replied. And I did. That was enough. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time letting everything settle, because this part, this aftermath, it wasn't about what was true. It was about what people chose to believe, and I had already learned something important. You can't control that. You can only decide how you live with it. Ethan didn't come over that day, and I didn't expect him to. Ending something like that publicly, decisively, it doesn't just leave a mark. It leaves space, and people need time to understand what fills it. The next day passed quietly, then the next. No calls, no messages, just distance. But this time, it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like process. By the third day, my routine had started to return. Morning coffee, a walk through the neighborhood, time in the garden. Simple things. Things that reminded me that my life was still mine, regardless of what had happened. And slowly, something else began to take shape. Not relief, not even closure, but steadiness. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't bracing for the next moment of exclusion or tension. I was just living. And that mattered more than I realized. Ethan came by on the fourth day. No warning, no message. Just a knock at the door around mid-afternoon. I opened it and there he was. He looked different again. Not broken, not lost, but quieter, more grounded. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. For a moment we just stood there. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He nodded and walked inside, glancing around the house like he was seeing it with new eyes, or maybe just clearer ones. We sat in the living room, the same place we had talked before. But this time, the air between us felt different. Not heavy, not strained, just honest. "How are you?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know," he said. "Better than I was. Worse than I expected." I nodded. "That makes sense." He looked down at his hands. "I've been dealing with a lot," he said. "Canceling things, talking to people, untangling everything." I didn't interrupt, because I knew this part wasn't about explaining. It was about processing. "She tried to contact me," he added after a moment. "Vanessa," he nodded. "What did she say?" He let out a short breath. "That I embarrassed her. That I ruined everything. That I overreacted." Familiar words. I didn't respond, because I didn't need to. "And her parents," he continued, "they've been calling too." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "I can imagine. They're saying I owe them an apology," he said, "that I should have handled it privately." I leaned back slightly. "And what do you think?" He looked at me. For a moment I saw hesitation. "Then I think I did what I had to do," he said. There it was. Not anger, not defensiveness, just clarity. I nodded slowly. "I agree." He exhaled some of the tension, leaving his shoulders. "I also started looking at my finances," he said. That caught my attention. "And there are things I didn't notice before," he admitted. "Transactions, requests, patterns. I didn't push, didn't need to. I've started separating everything," he added. "Accounts access all of it." "That's good," I said. He nodded. "It's just a lot to go through." "I know." A quiet pause settled between us. "Then I owe you more than an apology," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "You owe me change," I replied. The words came gently, but clearly he didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just nodded. "I know." And for the first time, I believed him. Because it wasn't in what he said, it was in how he said it. No excuses, no justifications, just ownership. "I'm not expecting things to go back to the way they were," he added. I appreciated that, because neither was I. "They won't," I said. He nodded again. "I just want to do better moving forward." I held his gaze. "That's where it starts." Another pause. Then something shifted. Subtle, but real. "Can I come by again?" he asked. Not out of habit. Not out of obligation. But intentionally. "Yes," I said. A small smile touched his face. Not big, not dramatic, just genuine. And that was enough. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the empty driveway. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It was about building something new. Something more honest, more grounded, more real. Because sometimes you don't get back what you had. You get something different. Something earned. And if you're willing to accept that, it can be even stronger than before. It wasn't a grand apology that brought us back together. There was no dramatic speech, no moment where Ethan stood in front of me and tried to undo everything with the perfect combination of words. Instead, it happened slowly, quietly, in ways that didn't draw attention but meant everything. 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened, Ethan came by again, then again the following Sunday, and the one after that. Not out of obligation, not because he felt guilty, but because he chose to. That was the difference. The first few visits were simple: coffee, short conversations, long pauses. We didn't rush anything. We didn't pretend everything was fine. We just showed up. And sometimes that's the hardest part. One afternoon, he helped me in the garden. It had been a while since I'd asked anyone for help out there. It was my space, my routine, something I had built with my own hands over the years. But that day when he offered, I didn't hesitate. We worked side by side, pulling weeds, trimming back overgrown edges, replanting a few sections that hadn't survived the season. For a long time, neither of us said much. Then out of nowhere, he spoke. "I didn't realize how much I had stopped coming here," he said. I glanced at him. "You had other things going on." He shook his head slightly. "That's not the same as not noticing. I let that sit, because he was right. There's a difference between being busy and being absent. I think I convinced myself it was temporary," he continued, "that once things settled, I'd come back, that everything would just go back to normal." I picked up a small plant, brushing dirt gently from its roots. "Life doesn't usually work like that," I said. He gave a small, quiet laugh. "No, it doesn't." We kept working, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were trying to fix anything. It felt like we were simply being present, together. Over the next month, things began to take shape in a way I hadn't expected. Ethan didn't rush forgiveness. He didn't ask for it directly. Instead, he showed change, consistent, steady, real. He started going to counseling. Not because I told him to, because he chose to. "I need to understand how I let things get that far," he told me one evening. I nodded. That's a good place to start. He also made changes in his life, practical ones. He switched jobs, something he had been hesitant to do before. Said he wanted a fresh start, a space that wasn't tied to everything that had happened. He restructured his finances, closed accounts, separated everything that had been entangled. Step by step, he was rebuilding, not just externally, internally. And I saw it, not in big gestures, but in small, consistent ones. The way he listened when I spoke, the way he paused before responding, the way he didn't dismiss things he didn't immediately agree with. That was new, and it mattered. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, he called. "Are you home?" he asked. "Yes." "Good," he said. "I'll be there in about 30 minutes. There was something in his tone. Not urgent, not heavy, just intentional. When he arrived, he didn't come empty-handed. He brought groceries, bags of them. "What's all this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Dinner," he said simply. I watched him walk into the kitchen, setting things down, moving with a kind of quiet focus I hadn't seen in a long time. "You're cooking?" I asked. He glanced over his shoulder. "Don't sound so surprised." I smiled faintly. "I'm just curious." "Well," he said, "you've cooked for me my entire life." Figured it was my turn. Something about that landed deeper than it should have. Not because of the act itself, but because of what it represented. Effort, intention, care. I leaned against the doorway as he started preparing things, chopping vegetables, heating pans, moving through the space like he was trying to learn it all over again. "You don't have to do this," I said gently. He didn't look up. "I know." A pause. "I want to." That was the difference. Again, everything now came from choice, not expectation, not obligation. Choice. We sat down at the table about an hour later, the same table Daniel had built, the same one that had held years of conversations, arguments, laughter, and silence. But that night, it felt different. Not because of what had changed in the room, but because of what had changed between us. The meal wasn't perfect. The chicken was slightly overcooked, the seasoning a little uneven. But none of that mattered, because it wasn't about the food, it was about the moment. I used to think being a good son meant providing, he said at one point. I looked at him. What do you think now? He hesitated. Then I think it means showing up, he said. I nodded slowly. Yes. A quiet pause followed. Then I didn't show up, he added. The honesty was still there. Unfiltered. I'm here now, he said. I met his gaze. I see that. And I did. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. Enough to begin again. Later that evening, as he was getting ready to leave, he paused by the door. Mom, yes, I know things won't go back to the way they were, he said. I nodded. They won't. He took a breath. But I think they can be better. I studied him for a moment, then gave a small, genuine smile. I think so too. He smiled back. And this time, it reached his eyes. After he left, I walked back into the house, turning off the lights one by one. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway. Each space felt settled, not empty, not full, just right. I stood for a moment in the quiet, letting everything that had happened over the past few weeks move through me. The message, the pain, the truth, the collapse, and now the rebuilding. Because in the end, it wasn't the wedding that mattered. It was what we chose after it fell apart. And what we chose was something real, something honest, something that didn't need perfection to be strong, just truth and the willingness to stay. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest, not because they don't care, but because they lose sight of what truly matters. Love without boundaries can turn into sacrifice, and sacrifice when unbalanced can become quiet self-erasure. I learned that being a parent doesn't mean always saying yes. It doesn't mean staying silent to keep the peace, and it certainly doesn't mean accepting disrespect just to remain in someone's life. Real love, whether between parent and child or between partners, requires honesty. It requires accountability. And sometimes it requires the courage to step back, so the truth has space to be seen. Ethan had to lose something to understand that. And so did I. But in the end, we didn't just rebuild what we had. We built something better, stronger, more real. So I want to ask you, if you were in my place, would you have canceled the catering? Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? And if you were Ethan, would you have had the courage to walk away? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every comment. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about family, truth, and finding your strength, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that matter most.